leads us nicely then into beginning conversation around the 80-20 rule here, which, you know, it's taken us a little while to get here because it's been fascinating talking with you just about, you know, I guess the foundation, right, of being an entrepreneur. That stuff you kind of have to go. You can't skip it, right? It's just you got to go through that period. But for those people now who are, you know, they're kind of getting their feet wet with their first business perhaps, or maybe they've had a failure and they're kind of going around for the second or third time. Let's talk about marketing. And before we kind of dive into 80-20 and you tell us a bit more about how this all came around and how it works, what's your definition of marketing, Perry?
Marketing is the art and science of helping people who need each other find each other.
Okay. And the 80-20 principle, obviously this book has just blown up. It's one of the absolute leading books on sales and marketing out there. It's fantastic. How did this all come about, Perry? When did you really kind of identify this and start working on the principles that are in the book?
80-20 Sales and Marketing is the book I wish I'd had at my first sales job, which I did not have. And I was way too optimistic, and I thought, oh, this isn't going to be too hard. And it was that thing of like going into some new industry and thinking, oh, well, that, you know, this should be easy. It wasn't. It was very hard. And so I didn't really truly discover 80-20 until about 5 or 6 years after all of that. And I'd already gotten a degree of success in business, and I read a book by Richard Koch called The 80-20 Principle, which is sort of the granddaddy reference of 80-20 in business. It's a great book. And at the beginning of the book, he made a throwaway comment. He said 80-20 has a lot to do with fractals and chaos. Now, there's this whole branch of science called chaos theory. If anybody knows what the butterfly effect is, which is the idea that butterfly wings could cause a hurricane 6 months later, you know, somewhere in the world that like, it's like the air currents multiply, and then, you know, and it's about the unpredictability of the world. Okay. It's the butterfly effect is why you can't predict the weather more than 2 weeks in advance, because there are too many complicated interactions. Well, I knew a whole lot about that stuff, and I suddenly like had a giant epiphany. It was like my head just set on fire, because I had studied the butterfly effect a lot, and I understood chaos theory. And the thing about chaos theory is, like, if you fly across the country and you look down on rivers, or if it's a rainy day and you stoop down in your sidewalk and you see a little stream running, you know, across your yard, they look identical and they branch the same. Like a tiny little stream in your yard versus a creek versus a river versus the Yangtze River in China, they all have the exact same pattern. Trees are fractal because you look at the whole tree and there's a branching pattern, but you can zoom in to the branches, to the leaves, all the way to the veins on the leaves, to the cell. You could get a microscope and there's still a branching pattern. Okay. That's what fractals are. And so fractals means pattern within a pattern within a pattern. And when Richard said that, I'm like, whoa, if that's true, that means there's an 80-20 inside every 80-20. And then there's another one, and there's another one. Oh my word. That changes the world. So 80-20, 100 years ago, Vilfredo Pareto figured out 20% of the people own 80% of the wealth, 20% of the people own 80% of the real estate, 20% of the people own 80% of the buildings and whatever. And it doesn't matter what country we go to. It's always true. It doesn't matter what economic system they use. It's always true. And what I what I realized was, oh my goodness, well, not only is that true, but it's like there's a pattern and a pattern and a pattern. And so that means, listen closely, it means that 80% of your sales is going to come from 20% of your customers. But it also means 80% of 80% of your sales is going to come from 20% of 20% of your customers. And it means the 80 of the 80 of the 80 comes from 20 of the 20. So like that one, you get 3 levels deep. 50% of your sales comes from 1% of your customers. Well, if you know that, if you know, and let me help you understand, this is like a law of physics. This is a law of nature. This isn't just a little thing you write on a 3x5 card that may be occasionally helpful. No, this is like gravity. There isn't anything you can do to make 100% of your sales come evenly from 100% of your customers other than just refusing them to sell them what they want to buy. Okay? Now, if you only will sell one cigarette lighter to one customer at a time, then every single one of your customers will be equal. But if you sell cigarette lighters, most customers are going to buy one, but some customers are going to want to buy a truckload. Mm-hmm. Okay? And you will get half of your revenue will come from 1% of your customers. And that's okay. And that's just sales. Okay. It's also true of product defects, and it's also true of shoplifting. It's true of employee productivity. It's true of problems with employees. It's true of how the space gets used in your restaurant. It's true of the spreadsheets and financial reports and Google campaigns and Facebook campaigns and the opt-ins and your email lists and emails getting opened and not getting opened and clicks. All of it is 80-20. Mm-hmm. And so if you learn this for the first time in your life, you suddenly have like a new pair of glasses where everything in your entire world looks different. And suddenly you're like, there's a lever, and there's a lever, and there's a lever. Oh, and guess what? There's a whole bunch of wasted stuff here, and there's a whole bunch of wasted stuff over here. In fact, you could take my book and Richard's book, and if you've mastered the material in those books, you could walk into any company in the world as a consultant and start fixing their problems. And you'll be better at it than they are because you can see it from the outside and you know where the levers are. I have a ton of customers who are consultants, and they may be known as a Facebook ads guy or a copywriter or a web designer or an Infusionsoft person or whatever. They may be there, there's something they got initially hired for. Okay, but the way they see themselves and the way they think is, I am an 80-20 levers adjuster. And I walk into situations and I look at what they're doing and I look at the numbers and I look at the processes and I find the 80-20 levers and we start fixing stuff. And there's money everywhere. There's inefficiencies everywhere. Most people assume that most industries are reasonably healthy or reasonably competent or reasonably well optimized. No. Most industries are incompetent. Most industries are full of inefficiency. Most industries are terribly unoptimized, and there's lots of room for improvement. But most people can't see it because they think in terms of averages instead of those levers.
So in a way, Perry, someone listening right now who is currently, employed, they're working in a company, they could even look around themselves right now and start learning this stuff and actually start providing more value inside that company and even, come to an arrangement with their employer so that some of those those profits that might be realized could start coming their way, and then they could use that and start investing into their own project on the side, right? That could be a really good way to get started.
Yes, Christian. And I, in fact, I don't think you'll ever be a great entrepreneur if you couldn't be a great employee, or at least try to be a great employee first. Like if your ethic is to do a half-assed job on everything, you'll do a half-assed job on your own business too, right? Like I think you should go to an employer and you should give them 100%. They should get 110%, of their money's worth from you. And there's no reason they can't, because you know what? 80/20 applies to employees too, the actual value employees. Okay, so in a typical company that has 10 employees, let's guess that the lowest paid employee might be paid $30,000 a year, and the highest paid one might maybe the owner makes 150, let's say, and everybody's in between. So there's only like maybe a 5-to-1 ratio, and maybe the bottom person on the rung is part-time. Okay, but the actual contribution they make to the actual function of the business is not nearly that equal. Okay, the real truth is that 2 of the 8 people do 3/4 of the important stuff and bring in 3/4 of the money, or deliver 3/4 of the value. And everybody else is just contributing these little pieces. And if you become the 80/20 person where you are the 1% that delivers 50% of the value, or you're the 5% that delivers 2/3 of the value, then nobody's getting rid of you. Or if they do, you'll get snatched up really fast by somebody else, because people can tell. But people's contribution to a bottom line is not nearly as equal as their pay scales are.
Yeah. And a quote that I often, bring up on Escape the Rat Race Radio from Jim Rohn is, you don't get paid for time, you get paid for the value that you put into that time. So exactly as you're saying right there. So let's talk about some of the other aspects of marketing and things that you talk about in the book. And one of these is this concept of the bleeding neck. So would you mind explaining what you mean by the bleeding neck?
So if you go to the hospital, the emergency room, with a broken arm, right? You just broke your arm and you're freaking out, right? And you limp in there. The receptionist gives you a clipboard and sends you over to a chair with some Good Housekeeping magazines and says, here, fill in these forms and we'll see you in a little while. And like an hour and a half later, a nurse comes and sees you, right? But if some guy walks in with a gunshot wound with blood squirting out of his neck and spurting onto the ceiling, they're not going to make him fill out that clipboard thing. They're going to take him right in. And it shows you that your definition of an emergency and the emergency room's definition of emergency are 2 different things, right? Well, my friend John Mendoza came up with this list called the 5 power disqualifiers. And it's an ingenious list because it's the 5 things that are always true anytime anybody sells anything to anybody. Now that's a pretty good list. So number 1, they have a bleeding neck. Okay? Like, the people that are going to absolutely buy today are the ones with blood squirting out of their neck onto the ceiling. Like, they will do anything, right? So years go by and all these people tell this guy, you need to exercise, you need to lower your cholesterol, you need to get in shape, right? And he doesn't listen, and he doesn't listen, and he doesn't listen, and he won't buy prevention, and then he has a heart attack. And now he will spend any amount of money to fix his problem, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's the power of bleeding neck. Number 2, they have the money. If they don't have the money, they're not going to buy. Now, as elementary as that sounds, I ignored that for years. it was as though I thought that if we sit in a circle and sing Kumbaya long enough, and if they like me and if I like them, well, there's somehow or another they're going to buy. No. If they don't have the money, they're not buying. Okay? Number 3, they have to have the ability to say yes. Especially in business-to-business sales, most of us sell to people who have the ability to say no, but they can't say yes. Right? So you got the software and you go show it to some engineer at some company and he goes, oh, well, I'll have to show this to my boss. Well, that's terrible because he won't show it as well as you did. Okay. And he's not going to like take any relational risks with his boss probably. Right? Like you should have talked to his boss, not him, like the first time out. Number 4, they buy into your unique selling proposition. Well, do they buy into it or not? If they don't, like, well, you know, Cadillac has a different unique selling proposition than a Jaguar, right? And a Cadillac guy is not going to buy a Jaguar. I've never known anybody that had a Cadillac and a Jaguar. Maybe they're out there, but it's like 2 different creatures, right? And the 5th one is it fits their overall plans. Okay, so if they have a bleeding neck, if they have the money, if they have the ability to say yes, if they buy into your USP and it fits their overall plans, they're going to buy.
Yeah.
Now, I want you to notice this actually flips all of sales and marketing because it makes it a disqualification process, not a convincing people process. If you start with these 5 questions, and they're in the 80-20 sales and marketing book, and I elaborate on them quite a bit, but if you start with these 5 questions, you're eliminating people before you ever talk to them. You're going to spend any time, you're not going to put any emotional pressure on them. You're not going to put any expectations on them. They're like, okay, so like, do you really have a problem here? Or do you not really have a problem? Do you have the money for this? It's like, hey, I don't want to waste anybody's time here. You know, I don't want to sell you something you can't afford. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I don't want to sell you something you don't have any budget for. That's not going to help anybody, right? Oh, well, so if we move forward on this, are you the person who approves this, or do we need to get somebody else's help in this situation before we can move forward? Well, you find this stuff before you do the whole dog and pony show and you buy everybody lunch and you drive across town or you get on an airplane or whatever. Saves you a huge amount of time and it just takes pressure off the whole situation.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And what do you say to the phrase that is often used in sales, you know, people buy what they want and not what they need?
Well, it's true. It's true. And so what you need to do is you need to sell people what they want and include what they need. Look, I do this all the time because I train business people, and there's some things in training and education and business strategy that are a lot easier to sell than others. But just because they're easy to sell doesn't mean they're the most important thing, right? And so I do this all the time. And so when you're selling, you should maybe draw a line down the middle of a piece of paper and divide your product into these are the aspects that they want and these are the aspects that they need. And the wants are going to drive the sale. And the needs rationalize the sale once they've decided that they want something. And so you just have to work with the quirkiness of human behavior. Like your customers don't actually have to be logical. They just need to make a decision that you know is going to work out for them so that a year from now they're very happy that they did business with you. one of the reasons I think people get disillusioned with business gurus and authors and speakers and people like that is a lot of authors only sell people what they want. And it's like, well, after 2 years of just eating Oreo cookies, my body is not in very good shape, and I don't feel good about myself, and I'm not happy, and I'm depressed. And this happens to people in business education all the time. They just eat Oreo cookies. And that goes back to sometimes people aren't ready to listen until they've had a few failures. That's just the truth.
Yeah. Now, for someone in those early stages, they are still perhaps validating their product, their service, they're in that proof of concept stage. How much easier is it for someone now, because of online marketing and technology and advertising and Google Adwords? You obviously were on really, really early. You became leading authority with Google Adwords. The same thing with Facebook. Obviously, that has become the big thing over the last sort of, 5 years or so. Is it something that you say a new business now, they can just spend some money, learn these skills and pay for some traffic and validate their product that way? Or do you still believe in organic methods of actually selling face-to-face first and foremost?
So I'll give you two answers. The first is just a shortcut. This will save you so much money, and whenever I've ignored this, it's cost me money. So let's say you've got a very well-developed concept for a product or a service that you want to sell. And you are now going to have to put a good deal of effort into building that product, right? Let's say it's a piece of software, right? Software always takes longer than you thought it would. Before you start developing the product, you should go out, show people what you're going to do, and get them to write a check in advance to buy it. And maybe you give them 60% off. Okay? You say, when this software comes out, it's going to be $10,000. And it's going to do all these things on my PowerPoint slide. It's going to do all that stuff. It'll be ready in a year. If you will write me a check today, I'll sell it to you for $4,000. I'll sell it to you for $2,500. If you cannot get somebody to write that kind of a check, you shouldn't develop the software. And now that is probably a telephone or face-to-face conversation. It's almost certainly not a web page. Okay, and one of the ways that marketing has changed is that it used to be market research by buying traffic used to be cheap. It used to be Google clicks are cheap, Facebook clicks are cheap. I don't need to go get on an airplane and go see anybody. I'll just test 5 different landing pages, 5 different offers on Google. I'll just run a bunch of traffic through and let's see what the world responds to. That was great 10 or 15 years ago. It's horrendously expensive now. And so now, well, if you're going to do cheap market research, it's going and reading online and seeing what people are saying and seeing what people are complaining about and seeing what people are commenting on and seeing what they say in their reviews and all that kind of stuff. But then, like, any kind of live face-to-face interaction where you can read the facial expressions, you can ask questions, you can probe, you can dig, you can propose scenarios, you can discuss it all over beers. That is super critically important, because what the marketer comes up with and what the customer wants are almost never the same. And I think the way you get there is by iteration. You just keep so what about this? What if we build it this way and you get feedback? What if you build it this way and you get it's feedback, like never before. And that it'll save you But what I just told you is going to save somebody like 5 years of their life, and probably $1 million.
Yeah, take heed of that advice. And where do you see this world moving? Online advertising, we've seen Google Adwords, the highs and lows, shall we say, and I'm sure of course people are still using Google AdWords to great effect, but obviously it's changed, and so has Facebook ads changed a lot. Where do you see things moving in the next 5 to 10 years, Perry?
So all the big platforms, what they're trying to do is they're trying to squeeze everybody into their AI. Okay. In fact, Google is making things so it's almost impossible to old school, simple A/B split test things anymore. And what they want to do is they want advertisers to pay for all of the learning that their AI has to do. Okay? This is good for Google. This is not good for you. Okay? But this is their orders from on high. Well, it takes billions and billions of dollars of traffic to run through all these mazes that they build so that they can get all the data and figure out how it all works. And they want to send the bill to you. So, and it's true, again, all of the platforms, this is true. LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever. So you must be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. You generally can't believe anything that the reps say. The only people you can trust are people who learn this stuff on their own dime and learn it in the trenches. I mean, this is why we sell Google Ads Mastery by Mike Rhodes. It's why we sell Facebook Prime by Keith Krantz. It's because these guys are on the firing line with clients, running agencies, buying traffic for themselves, doing different things, and they know how the machine works. Google will lie to you. Facebook reps will lie to you. Half the time they won't even know that they're lying because they just are doing what they got told in their training class. Okay. And they're nice and they're from this blue chip company and Google has a great brand. They're still lying. Okay. In fact, Google, frankly, Google is the boyfriend that throws his girlfriend down the stairs in the cheap hotel. Okay. They abuse their customers to an unbelievable extent, and you can't trust them any farther than you can throw them. So you get all moralistic about it. You're like, oh, that's terrible. Well, remember this. Your competitors are probably believing what they're telling them, but that doesn't mean you have to, right? There's always somebody that's thinning the herd. Okay? Whoever and whatever it might be. It's always something. You just need to be smarter than the rest of the herd. And you need to invest in your education. You need to get it from people that are really doing it and not just selling bright, shiny objects. And then it can be really good. And there are always elements of these platforms that most people are ignoring. Okay, so there are so many nooks and crannies in Google Display Network, it's not even funny. There's 10 or 12 different ways to target people. Okay. There's these platforms. Remember, these companies have umpteen billions of dollars. They know they have to stay ahead of the curve. They know that their competitors are chomping at their butts. And so they are throwing software development and experiments and programmers and everything into these advertising platforms. And when they have really big customers like Amazon and eBay and Geico and all these, they'll do whatever these guys want them to do, and they'll build features that these guys want them to build. But then the feature is in the system and hardly anybody else knows how to use it. So a lot of the best pay-per-click guys I know of my students, is they find these parts of the platform where, okay, I am going to get really, really good at using in-market advertising, which is the feature that knows somebody's shopping for a refrigerator because they're looking at their behavior. I'm going to get really, really good at just that one thing, and then I will know how to sell refrigerators all day long, and nobody else will. So that's the kind of thinking that gets people ahead of the game.
Mm. So again, maybe you've just answered it, Perry, but for someone who is looking to use Facebook or Google advertising for the first time without just wasting loads and loads of money and loads of time, is there a kind of just a top 3 tips for those guys right now?
Yeah, number 1, do not be stingy about learning it. Number 2, it is a very high value skill. Okay. Most people, they think of Google advertising or Facebook advertising as, you know, I ought to be able to pay somebody $50 an hour to do this. That should do it. That should be good. It's $1,000 an hour skill if it's done right. Okay. And most of the time it's worth you learning. Why? Because on the internet, it's as close as you can get to your customer. On the internet, you're not seeing these people. You're not talking to these people. But like if you're sitting there and you've got the traffic dials and you're figuring out the keywords and you're figuring out the forms of targeting and then you're writing the ads and you're seeing the response they get, you are engaging in the frontline customer conversation. And another thing is, never hire or accept training from somebody who did not learn it on their own dime. Okay, there is an infinite amount of difference between a person who works for IBM and IBM gives them a budget and they're supposed to buy Facebook ads. IBM says buy $30,000 a month of Facebook ads, and then they buy $30,000 a month of Facebook ads. That person, in my mind, that's a poodle, okay, as opposed to a Wolverine. The poodle says, I worked for IBM, and I had a budget of $30,000 a month. And a whole bunch of people go, you work for IBM? Wow, I'm going to hire you. That person may know nothing. They could be completely incompetent. There's a lot of people like that.
Yeah.
You know who you can trust? I spent $30,000 a month of my own money selling this widget. And for every dollar I put in, I got $1.22 back. That's who you hire. That person is infinitely smarter than the guy that worked at IBM. And the world of pay-per-click consultants is full of people who have never done this on their own dime. Do not touch them with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
If they cannot prove to you that they spent their own money to buy traffic, ignore them.
Sure. And of course, you've got the ultimate guides, which are available everywhere, certainly on Amazon.
Right.
And that would definitely be a starting point for anyone who's looking to learn more about this right now. Just before we wrap things up, Perry, we've talked about the 80-20 rule. We've applied it really to sales and marketing. But of course, you said, it applies to everything really in life. Is there just a simple, almost personal analysis that someone can do who's listening now and apply the 80-20 just to their life and just get almost some instant results from that?
Yes. You probably have 226 friends on Facebook, but 1% of your friends is 50% of your relationships. Okay. So that means your closest 3 friends are half of your real connections. Okay. Dan Kennedy liked to say, there's 6 handles on a casket, and if you've got 6 real friends in your life that bury you, you actually did okay. Your 226 Facebook friends, vast majority of them are almost irrelevant to your life. How are you treating your wife or your husband? How are you treating your kids? And then, like, and that's obvious. We know that. Okay. And then what about that your next, like, your very closest friends? You know, I remember one day a long time ago kind of realizing I've got a lot of colleagues, but I don't really have any friends. I wonder if that's a problem. It was. I didn't have anybody to talk stuff out with. And it's not the same as going to a seminar and talking shop with all the people. Yeah, you need to do that too. And that's going to be a different list. You're going to have a list of like close business friends. But I mean in your personal life, you know, like you're going to have problems in your marriage. You're going to have problems with your kids. You're going to have problems with whatever. You need people that are good listeners. You need people that care about you. And that's 80-22, just like everything else.
Yeah. And often people who kind of do discover this world of business, entrepreneurship, it might be that your partner, they don't get this, right? They don't
No,
share
probably
that.
not.
So it can be a lonely journey sometimes. Yeah. But ending on a positive note, it's been fantastic speaking with you today, Perry. I feel like we could talk and hopefully we'll get another opportunity in the future to do so. Definitely, I'll be paying closer attention to the newspapers in the UK for your next visit, and hopefully we'll catch up then. But final words for our listeners, Perry. I always ask my guests, for someone listening right now, they're maybe still stuck in the 9 to 5. They're squashed up on that underground on their way to work. They're crammed in the motorway in that traffic jam, and something is holding them back. They know inside themselves that they want to break free. They want to have more control, but it's generally fear that's holding them back. What would you like to say to those people listening right now?
I would say that the way out is the way in. And what I mean by that is the best thing you can do is make the absolute most of the situation you're in right now. Okay. Because it becomes a habit and a lifestyle. So, all right, you're in some job and you don't really like it, and you don't being on the motorway every morning and every after. I get that. Okay. But when you go to that job, two things. A, give it 110%, like really apply yourself. And number two, my old friend Tom Hubyar used to say, there's burning bushes everywhere. And he was referring to the story in the Bible where Moses comes across a burning bush and God starts talking to him. What Tom meant by that is there are lessons you need to learn everywhere you could turn. And most of the time, we're not paying attention. You know, there's an old Tears for Fears song that says, "This is the working hour. We are paid by those who learn by our mistakes." Your job, your boss is paying for everybody's mistakes. There are so many mistakes you can learn from if you're paying attention. So that means being wide awake. So like wherever you are, it's like you might not like where you are, but there's still burning bushes there. And there's still stuff you should stop, look, pay attention. What is this trying to tell me? I think reality is always telling us stuff. And most of the time we're not open. Okay, so what is the laboratory of reality really trying to tell me today?
Yeah. Great words to end us on there, Perry. I've really enjoyed speaking with you today. Thanks so much for being a great guest.
It's been a pleasure, Christian. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.